Wikimedia Commons Never Trump. Conservative columnist Bret Stephens. Photo labeled for reuse via Wikimedia Commons. Big media organizations have a Bret Stephens problem. It could also be called a David Brooks problem, or a George Will problem. But Bret Stephens' embarrassing actions in the bedbug controversy over the past few days make him the perfect poster child for a challenge that spans the much of the journalism industry. To recap briefly, a university professor called Stephens a bedbug. In response to a typically sophomoric column, Stephens responded by trying to get the professor fired in email exchanges the professor took the issue public, and Stephens escalated with a ludicrous and falsely attributed column comparing the professor's rhetoric to Nazi dehumanization that should never have made it past the editor's desk. Stephens is the sort of conservative columnist that major newspapers love to hire. Anti-Trump, contrarian mediocrities ostensibly concerned with free speech and liberal overreach. He and others like him allow editors and ombudsmen to include conservative opinion without actually giving voice to conservatism as it truly exists today. A more genteel version of the provocateur pseudo-intellectualism of a Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson, Bret Stephens and his fellow Never Trump commentators offer the salt-coated antebellum conservatism that even a good book fair tote bag-carrying liberal can love. They provide climate denialism not as an affront to God's plan or a conspiracy of pointy-headed nerds in it for the grant money or an interference in the workings of glorious libertarian capitalism, but merely as a questioning of consensus tyranny of thought. They offer imperialism as expansion of human freedom rather than jingoistic corporate and militaristic predation. They offer appeals to a patriarchal order of racial hierarchy not as a matter of overt Bible-thumping or white supremacy, but coded appeals to a culture of family and respect that just so happen to resemble a whitewashed Norman Rockwell painting where father knows best. The problem, of course, is that men like Stephens, Will and Brooks and they almost uniformly middle-aged or older white men represent very few people in actual civil society. Notably, very few of the kind wind up in elected office. Somewhere around 85% of Republicans support and approve of Trump. Most Republicans think anti-white racism is a bigger problem than anti-black racism. And neither Democrats nor independents are buying into the perspective. Ostensibly non-prejudiced, anti-Trump conservatism is far overrepresented in the media compared to its actual constituency. Why is this? While some of the explanation lies in the sort of interpersonal chumminess among select opinion makers who go to the right parties and went to the right schools as Chris Hayes lays bare in his Twilight of the Elites, it's also true that big media organizations face an unenviable challenge when it comes to presenting conservative opinion in the Trump era. On the one hand, editors have an obligation to their readers to present a wide spectrum of opinion, including ones with the core readers may disagree politically. On the other, editors also have a duty to maintain accuracy and social responsibility. Finally, they have both a financial and moral incentive to ensure that the opinions they print be interesting and well-considered, and not just a rehash of partisan talking points. As the conservative movement delves ever further into anti-scientific ignorance, overt bigotry and lockstep loyalty to its current leader, presenting responsible, accurate and interesting conservative opinion can be a challenge. So let's say you're the editor of a major magazine or newspaper, and you want to give voice to the somewhat less than half or so of the country that identifies broadly with conservative perspectives. Do you hire an alt-right figure with openly racist and sexist attitudes who actually represents what modern conservatism truly is and what its voters are, even though it will outrage your readers and provide a dangerous platform for hateful views? Do you hire partisan operatives who will parrot the talking points du jour and defend whatever outlandish pronouncements Donald Trump makes next, at the risk of ruining your brand in much the way CNN has done by inviting commentary from the likes of Jeffrey Lord and Trump Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany? Or do you hire a never-Trump conservative like Bret Stephens who doesn't actually represent very many people, but won't unduly offend readers' sensibilities or actively encourage racist violence, unless, of course, you include stumping for the Iraq War as the racist violence it is. Time and again, editors choose the third option as the path of greatest comfort and least resistance, at the cost of actual representation. For what it's worth, they do this on the left as well. Despite the strong progressive tilt of the Democratic electorate over the last decade, including but not limited to the rise of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her ideological allies, the resilience of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in the 2020 presidential primary, as well as of course Sanders' own surprisingly strong showing in the 2016 primary, both cable news and major newspapers have a dearth of representation from pundits and opinion writers who might generally be described as falling into the Sanders coalition. They continue to sample opinion from writers much more concerned about preserving the false veneer of past cultural unity and the economic stability of those with 6- and 7-figure mutual fund and real estate portfolios than the more representative and growing class of people struggling to afford a down payment on the first mortgage while working 2 gig economy jobs, paying off exorbitant student loans and stuck in a private insurance hell of making too much for Medicaid, but too little to afford adequate medical care. The opinion makers are still much more old, white and male than the Democratic electorate at large, and even when younger women and people of color are added to the mix, they rarely espouse the more openly democratic socialist and social democratic positions of those demographics among the actual public. Solving this problem for left-leaning commentary is simple. Including more diverse and more progressive voices won't endanger or embarrass anyone or damage a media company's brand, though it may discomfort some centrist traditionalists. But in terms of conservative commentary, media organizations should look to err more on the side of actual representation. Why risk the ire of readers and do potential harm in order to present contrarian viewpoints that few Americans truly share? There is nothing novel or interesting in the sort of content that George Will, David Brooks and Bret Stephens provide. The takes are as predictable as the rising of the sun and the passing seasons, and it's not actually instructive as to the opinions of the Americans who continue to empower Republican policymakers. A better approach would be to hire Trump loyalists willing to defend the president and his actions, as well as those of Senate Leader McConnell and the Roberts Court, while strictly adhering to standards of fact-checking and anti-racism. If a conservative right could manage to defend modern Republican politics while remaining honest, accurate and without resorting to bigotry, that would be both potentially interesting and skillful enough to deserve publication. It would be more satisfying to conservative readers and more informative for liberal ones. But the time for providing a special platform for contrarian never-Trump conservatives should be at an end. It's both embarrassing and unproductive. Let's block ads. Why?